What would you do if you paid for a first-class seat, boarded with confidence, and then before the whole cabin were told you didn't belong? What if the reason wasn't about policy, wasn't about safety, but about the color of your skin? This is not just a story about an airline. It's the story of Cale Donovan, a man who built an empire with his own hands, who carried himself with calm dignity, only to be humiliated at 35,000 feet. A story where silence could have been the easy way out, where hush money was offered, and where powerful voices tried to bury the truth. But Cale made a choice that would spark a movement, ignite courtrooms, and shake an industry to its core. What happens when one man refuses to sell his dignity? How does a single injustice on a plane become the seed of systemic change? And what lessons does it leave for every one of us, long after the headlines fade? Stay with us as we uncover this journey. And before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of truth, dignity, and justice to light. The hum of the jet bridge always carried a certain electricity, that low vibration of rolling bags, murmurs of weary passengers, and the occasional metallic groan from the tunnel felt like a ritual before flight. For Cale Donovan, it was a familiar soundtrack. He had boarded hundreds of planes in his life, most of them in silence, most of them without anyone realizing who he truly was. Tonight was supposed to be no different. He adjusted the cuff of his blazer, balanced his leather carry-on against his hip, and stepped into the cabin of Horizon Atlantic Flight T-1A7 bound for Los Angeles. The cabin lights glowed with that faint golden hue meant to soothe travelers. Cale inhaled, catching the faint mix of coffee from the galley and the citrus cleaner still clinging to the armrests. He moved down the aisle with the steady poise of someone who understood both the weight of his presence and the value of restraint. First class was nearly full, a row of sharp suits, silk scarves, and headphones oversized enough to block the world. His seat, two-way, window side, waited like a promise of quiet after a long week. He slid his bag into the overhead bin, careful not to disturb the elderly woman in 1B who smiled politely as he settled in. Cale returned the smile, then lowered himself into 2A, pulling a small notebook from his inner pocket. Its leather cover bore the marks of years of use, each scratch a reminder of thoughts jotted down at midnight in hotel rooms, or strategies mapped out between board meetings. He flipped it open, pen in hand, ready to capture a phrase that had been circling his mind all afternoon. Dignity is not optional, but before the ink touched the page, a shadow fell across him, a man in his late 30s, tall with a sharp jaw and eyes that had learned entitlement young, stood blocking the aisle. His uniform carried the crisp authority of a chief flight attendant. His badge read Silas Trent. "Sir," Silas began, voice low but laced with steel, "this seat isn't available. I'll need you to relocate." Cale blinked, slowly closing his notebook. "I believe this is 2A. That's my boarding pass." Silas didn't flinch. "We have a priority passenger, platinum tier. This seat is reserved for him. You'll need to move." The words landed like a stone. Around them, conversation softened. The buzz of settling passengers faded into a hush. Cale felt dozens of eyes pressing against his skin, some curious, some sympathetic, most silent. He kept his tone even. "I purchased this ticket weeks ago. It was confirmed. Here is my boarding pass." He held it up with calm fingers. Silas glanced at it, eyes skimming past the digital confirmation code as though it were meaningless. "Yes, but operational adjustments happen. We'd like you to take a seat further back." Cale's chest tightened, not from anger, but from recognition. He had seen this pattern before, subtle shifts from respect to dismissal, quiet assumptions built into policy. He studied Silas for a long breath, noting the forced politeness that wrapped around a core of absolute certainty. Cale thought of his mother's voice, decades ago, telling him, "Never forget, son, they may test you, but don't let them tell you who you are." He placed the boarding pass neatly back on his lap. "I'm comfortable where I am," he said gently. The man's jaw tightened. "Sir, you're making this difficult." Cale caught a flicker of movement, a phone lifted in the row behind him. A young woman, maybe early 20s, dark curls framing her face, angled her camera discreetly. He saw her lips move. "It's already recording." Her name, he would later learn, was Naomi Cade. The tension thickened. Silas pressed on. "Last chance. Sir, move to the seat I assign, or I'll escalate this to the captain." Kyle exhaled slowly. Inside, his mind swirled. Part of him wanted to comply, to spare himself the spectacle, to shield his family name from another unnecessary headline. Another part, deeper, heavier, refused. This wasn't about a seat. It was about the unspoken message behind it that even when he followed every rule, even when he paid the full price, his place could be stripped away because someone else was deemed more deserving. He leaned back against the leather headrest, eyes steady. "Do what you feel you must," he replied. Silas narrowed his eyes, then turned on his heel, disappearing down the aisle. The murmurs rose again, fragments of sentences breaking the cabin's hush. "That's not right." "Why him? Shh. Don't get involved." Cale closed his notebook, fingers tracing the cover, grounding himself in its familiar texture. He could feel the storm forming, and yet he sat in stillness, knowing that calm was its own form of defiance. Minutes later, Silas returned, this time with another man at his side. The supervisor's navy blazer and polished shoes announced his authority before his name did. Marcus Veyron, the gate manager, carried the air of someone accustomed to obedience. He stopped at row 2, folded his arms, and spoke with rehearsed patience. "Mr. Donovan." "Correct. We need your cooperation. Please, follow us to reassign your seat." Cale studied him carefully. The words were polite, but the implication was sharp. Cooperation. As if standing his ground was rebellion. As if asking for dignity was disruption. He thought of his daughter, Maya, who just last week had told him she wanted to study aerospace engineering. He wondered what kind of world she would inherit if he walked quietly now. "Mr. Veyron," Cale said, voice steady but resonant. "I have a confirmed seat in 2A. I am not moving." A ripple of gas traveled through the rows. The young woman's phone lens caught every syllable. And then, as if to punctuate the moment, Marcus sighed heavily. "Then I'll have to involve the captain." Cale's pulse thudded. He knew what was coming. He had seen enough headlines. Passenger refuses orders, removed by security. He imagined the images flashing across screens, the scrutiny, the endless speculation. His jaw clenched, but he forced his breath to remain slow. Even. Whatever storm awaited, he would meet it with stillness. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as preparations for departure continued. The seatbelt chime echoed like a warning bell. Cale's hand rested on his notebook again, but this time he did not open it. Instead, he whispered the words he had written so many times before: "Dignity is not optional." And as the sound of footsteps signaled the approach of the captain, the story of Flight 2087's unraveling began. The sound of polished shoes on the cabin floor cut through the whispers. Captain Roland Pierce appeared at the front, his hat tucked under his arm, his posture carrying the gravity of command. His expression was controlled, but his eyes flicked toward Silas Trent as though this was already an inconvenience. A few passengers craned their necks, hoping to catch every word of what was about to unfold. Captain Pierce stopped at row 2. He glanced at Marcus Veyron, then at Silas, before finally fixing his gaze on Cale Donovan. "Sir," the captain began, his voice calm but edged with authority, "I'm told there's an issue with your seat assignment." Cale raised his boarding pass again, holding it steadily in his hand. "No issue, Captain. My ticket is confirmed. Seat 2A. Pierce glanced briefly at the pass, long enough to recognize it was legitimate, but his tone did not shift. "Sometimes adjustments need to be made for operational reasons. We need your cooperation to move you to another seat so we can depart on time." The word cooperation echoed like a demand cloaked in civility. Cale's jaw tightened. He understood what this was not a question of logistics, but of perception. He was being asked to surrender his place for the comfort of someone deemed more important. Behind him, a murmur rose. Naomi Cade whispered to the person next to her, her phone still capturing the entire exchange. In the back row, an older man shook his head slowly. Some passengers averted their eyes, unwilling to be drawn into conflict. Others leaned forward, their curiosity stronger than their discomfort. Cale took a slow breath. Inside, his thoughts tangled. He wanted to protect his family from the storm this would unleash. He wanted to avoid becoming another headline, another viral clip dissected by strangers. But he also felt the weight of generations pressing against him, the unspoken responsibility that came with being visible, being successful, being black in a space where success itself could be questioned. "Captain Pierce," Cale said evenly, "I purchased this seat. I am not refusing safety instructions. I am not disruptive. I am simply occupying the seat I paid for." Silas crossed his arms, impatient. Marcus Veyron shifted uncomfortably, as if he wanted the matter finished before departure. The captain's voice sharpened. "Mr. Donovan, you are making this more complicated than it needs to be. I am asking you, politely but firmly, to relocate so we can continue with boarding. This is your final opportunity to comply voluntarily." The phrase "final opportunity" landed heavily, almost theatrical in its finality. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Cale's chest rose and fell. He thought of Celine, his wife, who always told him that his strength was not in how loud he spoke, but in how firmly he stood. He thought of Maya, who once asked him if fairness ever really existed in the world. He had told her yes. Now he wondered if this moment would betray that promise. His fingers pressed against the leather cover of his notebook, grounding him in memory. Inside that notebook were pages filled with strategies, speeches, and ideas for the future of his company. Yet right now, its value was in reminding him who he was, a man who built from nothing, who carried himself with dignity, who refused to shrink. "I will not move," Cale said. His tone was calm, deliberate, but unyielding. Gas rippled through the cabin. Naomi's phone caught the moment perfectly. The older man in row 4 muttered, "Good for him." A younger woman nearby clutched her armrest, visibly anxious at the rising tension. Captain Pierce's jaw tightened. He exchanged a quick glance with Marcus Veyron, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Silas smirked, satisfied that escalation was inevitable. "Then you leave me no choice," the captain said. "Security will be called." The words dropped like stones into water, sending ripples of unease across the cabin. Cale felt a flicker of heat in his chest, but he kept his expression composed. He had expected this. Still, hearing it spoken aloud was like a blade drawn. Inside, he battled with himself. One part of him screamed that compliance would spare him humiliation. Another part, the part forged in hardship, insisted that yielding would only teach others they could strip dignity whenever convenient. As the captain turned to leave, Naomi's voice rang out quietly but firmly from her seat. "I'm recording this. Everyone needs to see." A murmur of agreement stirred among a few passengers. The silence of complicity had begun to crack. Cale's eyes met Naomi's for the briefest moment. In that glance, he felt both gratitude and a renewed sense of resolve. He was no longer alone in the cabin. Marcus Veyron leaned down, speaking just loud enough for Cale to hear. "You could avoid all this. You know? Take the deal. Sit in the back. No one will remember." Cale turned his gaze toward the supervisor, his eyes steady. "That's the problem, Mr. Veyron. Too many people forget. And that's exactly why I won't." The supervisor straightened, visibly unsettled by the quiet force in Cale's words. Silas exhaled sharply, muttering something under his breath. He moved toward the galley, his posture triumphant, as though he had already secured the outcome. The captain disappeared toward the cockpit to radio for security. The cabin filled with a nervous energy, passengers whispering louder now, phones discreetly angled toward the scene. Some were sympathetic, others critical, but all were captivated. Cale leaned back into his seat, closing his eyes for a moment. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw flashes of his past, the narrow apartment where he grew up, his mother working 3 jobs to keep the lights on, the first time he wore a suit that didn't quite fit, the boardroom where he signed his first major contract. Each image reminded him of the journey that had brought him here. Each one fueled his conviction not to yield. When he opened his eyes, he found the cabin staring at him, some with curiosity, some with admiration, some with judgment. He felt the weight of those stares, but carried it with composure. Security would come. He knew it now. He braced himself, not just for the humiliation of being escorted off the plane, but for the storm that would follow. And yet, a quiet voice inside him whispered that perhaps this storm was necessary. Perhaps this moment, painful as it was, could ignite something larger than himself. The intercom crackled. Silas's voice carried through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We're experiencing a brief delay." Cale almost smiled at the irony. A delay, indeed, not just of a plane, but of a system too accustomed to ignoring its own inequities. As the minutes ticked by, footsteps echoed again in the aisle. Heavy, deliberate, the kind of steps that announced authority, the kind of steps that signaled the arrival of security. Cale adjusted his blazer, lifted his chin, and whispered under his breath, "Dignity is not optional." The moment of confrontation had arrived. The aisle felt narrower when the 2 security officers entered. Their uniforms were crisp, their expressions carefully blank, the kind of blankness that hides discomfort behind procedure. Every eye in the cabin tracked them as they approached row 2. The tension was heavy, as though the air itself had thickened. Cale Donovan sat still, his back straight, his hands resting loosely on the leather notebook in his lap. He knew the script. They would ask him to comply. They would frame it as a matter of safety, not fairness, and if he refused, they would remove him. The words had already been rehearsed in countless incidents across countless flights, but tonight it was him at the center. One of the officers, tall with tired eyes, leaned down. His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Sir, the captain has requested that you disembark. Please gather your belongings." Cale inhaled slowly. He looked at the officer, seeing not hostility but duty. A man sent to enforce someone else's decision. He thought about resistance. He thought about staying planted in two-way, forcing them to lift him, to drag him past the cameras. But then he thought of Celine, of Maya, of how every headline would twist defiance into aggression. He chose a different form of strength. "I will walk," Cale said softly, "but I want it clear that I do not consent to this. I am being removed unjustly." The officer gave a small nod. "Understood. Sir." Around them, passengers shifted in their seats. Phones rose higher. Naomi Cade whispered, "It's still rolling." The red light on her phone blinked, capturing every moment. Cale stood. The leather of his seat creaked as he rose. He reached up, sliding his carry-on from the overhead bin with deliberate calm. Every movement was measured, not rushed, not frantic. He would not let them script him as unruly. He would write his own script with composure. The walk began, step by step. He moved down the aisle, flanked by the two officers. The cabin had gone silent except for the mechanical hum of the ventilation system and the faint clicks of cameras. He could feel the eyes, the weight of judgment, curiosity, and quiet solidarity pressing against his back. As he passed row 4, a man muttered, "This is wrong." His voice was quiet, but it carried in the silence. Further back, a young woman whispered, "Why him? Why not anyone else?" Cal kept walking. Inside his chest, memory surged. He was 8 years old again, walking home from school with shoes too worn for the winter, hearing the whispers of neighbors about his mother's struggle. He was 17, standing outside a scholarship interview, being told he looked out of place in a building lined with portraits of white men in suits. He was 29, closing his first major deal, smiling through the tightness in his throat as an executive asked if he was the assistant. Every step down that aisle became a reminder of those moments. Every stare became a reflection of history repeating itself in new forms. Yet with each memory, his resolve thickened. He reached the mid-cabin, where Naomi raised her phone higher. Their eyes met again. In hers, he saw not pity, but conviction. She mouthed, "We're with you." He gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, but it steadied him. As he neared the back, a child's voice piped up from somewhere in row 18. "Why are they taking him?" The innocence in the question sliced through the heavy air. No adult answered. Silence stretched. The truth was too raw to explain. The jet bridge loomed ahead. Its fluorescent light spilled into the cabin, harsh and cold compared to the warm cabin glow. Cale stepped into it, the metallic clang beneath his shoes sounding louder than it should. The officers walked beside him, their silence both shield and cage. In the gate area, people were waiting. Some had already seen Naomi's live stream. Phones pointed at him. Flashes lit up the sterile walls. Reporters pressed forward with premature questions. "Mr. Donovan, why were you removed? Was it racism? Will you take legal action?" He did not answer. Not yet. He walked past them, his chest heavy, his mind swirling. Inside, a battle raged. One voice urged him to protect himself, to sign whatever non-disclosure agreement the airline would surely offer, to shield his company and family from a media storm. Another voice, deeper and older, told him that silence would not protect anyone, that dignity surrendered could never be reclaimed. in that moment. Cale remembered a night years earlier when Maya had come home from school in tears because a teacher had doubted her ability in math. He had knelt beside her and said, "You will always face people who try to place limits on you. The question is, will you let them?" Now he realized those words were not just for her. They were for himself. Back in the terminal, the airline staff huddled. Marcus Veyron's face was tight, his voice low as he spoke into a radio. Silas Trent lingered near the counter, his expression one of smug finality, as though he had restored order. Captain Pierce remained unseen, back in the cockpit, detached from the mess unfolding outside. Cale set his bag down by a row of plastic chairs. He sat, the weight of humiliation settling into his shoulders. Yet even as it pressed down, something inside him pushed back. He had not shouted. He had not fought. He had walked with dignity. And because of that, the world would see. Naomi's live stream was already trending. Notifications pinged on the phones of strangers across the country. The clip showed Cale sitting calmly, holding his boarding pass, insisting on his right to stay. It showed him standing, walking the aisle with steady steps, while others whispered about fairness. It showed the officers flanking him, the silence of the cabin, the question of the child. Within minutes, thousands of comments poured in. Unbelievable! This is what systemic racism looks like. He stayed calm, and they still removed him, never flying. Horizon Atlantic again. Cale watched none of it. He sat quietly, fingers tracing the cover of his notebook. His mind was already at war with itself. Part of him longed to retreat, to shield his family, to let the storm pass. But another part, louder with each passing second, told him this was no longer just his burden. A shadow fell across him. A woman in a Navy suit, not airline staff, but with a lawyer's sharp presence, approached. She extended a business card. Alyssa Monroe. She said, "Civil rights attorney. I saw the video. This isn't just wrong. It's unlawful." Cale accepted the card, his expression unreadable. "Thank you." She leaned closer, her voice firm. "You don't have to fight this alone. The whole world is already watching." The hum of the terminal swelled. Reporters pressed closer. Passengers muttered about delays. Airline staff tried to contain the scene, but the narrative had already escaped their control. The storm had begun, and Cale was at its center. He closed his notebook, slid it back into his jacket, and rose to his feet once more. The walk of shame was over. What came next would be a different kind of journey. The gate area of Horizon Atlantic Flight 2187 had become a theater. Dozens of passengers who had disembarked early stood with phones raised, documenting the aftermath. Airline staff clustered near the counter, their voices sharp whispers. A line of late boarding passengers stalled, unsure whether to proceed or stay, sensing that something larger than a delayed flight was unfolding. Cale Donovan sat in a molded plastic chair near the windows, his carry-on at his feet. Through the glass he could see the aircraft still docked at the jet bridge, its tail gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Inside that plane, passengers whispered about him, replayed what they had seen, and texted friends. Outside, the storm was already spreading across the digital world. He clasped his notebook, his fingers resting on its worn cover. His chest ached from humiliation, but beneath that ache there was a sharper edge forming. The decision he faced was not about one flight or one seat. It was about what he would allow to be written about him and by him. The crowd shifted. Naomi Cade, still holding her phone, threaded her way toward him, Her face glowed with the light of the live stream. "Mr. Donovan," she said, her voice steady, "it's everywhere already. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. People are outraged. You need to see this." She angled her screen toward him. The video showed him sitting calmly in 2A, boarding pass in hand, and Silas Trent insisting he move. It showed the captain's ultimatum. It showed him standing with dignity as he was escorted down the aisle. Kel looked at the video, then back at Naomi. How many people have seen it? She swallowed. Hundreds of thousands. It'll be millions by morning. Before he could answer, Alyssa Monroe appeared at his side. Her navy suit was immaculate, her heels sharp against the polished floor. She crouched slightly to meet his eyes. "Mr. Donovan, I know this is overwhelming, but you need to understand something. This isn't just an inconvenience. What they did to you is unlawful." Cale studied her. "And you are civil rights attorney," she replied, handing him a card again as if to reinforce her presence. "I specialize in discrimination cases, especially in transportation and housing. You don't have to decide anything right now, but I'd like to represent you if you choose to fight this." He looked down at the card, the letters blurring for a moment under the weight of everything pressing against him. Fight or retreat, expose or contain. The terminal loudspeaker crackled overhead, announcing another boarding call for a flight across the concourse. The mundane routine of travel continued around him, indifferent to the upheaval that had split his evening in two. "Mr. Donovan," Alyssa said, lowering her voice, "they'll try to make this go away. They'll offer you a settlement, a non-disclosure agreement. That's what they always do. But you have leverage right now. Public attention is a weapon. Use it." Cale leaned back in his chair. His mind pulled in two directions. One voice told him to protect his company, to think of the shareholders who trusted him, the contracts he had yet to sign. The other voice whispered of legacy, of what it meant to live up to his mother's sacrifices, to the promises he made to Maya about fairness. As his thoughts wrestled, another figure approached, Isla Torres, a junior flight attendant from the same plane. Her hair still tied neatly, her expression conflicted. She glanced over her shoulder before speaking, as if afraid of being overheard. "I'm sorry," Isla said quietly. "I saw what happened. I wanted to say something, but Silas, he made it clear what would happen if any of us contradicted him. He does this more than people realize." Cale looked at her carefully. "More than me?" She nodded, her eyes downcast. "Mostly to passengers of color, sometimes to women traveling alone. He uses policy as cover, and management looks the other way. Tonight wasn't the first time. It was just the first time someone recorded it." Her words hit like a confirmation of everything Cale already suspected. He felt both fury and clarity. This was not a personal humiliation. This was a pattern. Naomi lifted her phone again, whispering, "She should go on record." Isla paled, shaking her head. "Not yet. I'll lose my job. But if it comes to it, I'll speak." She looked at Cale, her eyes glimmering with something between fear and courage. "Please don't let them bury this." Cale reached out, resting his hand briefly on hers. "Thank you." Isla turned quickly and disappeared back into the staff area, leaving her words behind like a spark catching dry grass. The terminal buzzed louder as reporters arrived, tipped off by social media. Microphones appeared. Questions flew. "Mr. Donovan, do you intend to sue? Do you believe this was racial profiling? What message do you want to send?" Kyle stood slowly, his presence commanding even amid chaos. He looked at the cameras, then at Alyssa. She gave him a subtle nod, urging him to speak, but he did not. Not yet. His silence was deliberate. He knew that once he spoke, his words would be dissected, replayed, turned into headlines. For now, he chose stillness. He walked to the window, watching ground crew wheel carts under the belly of the aircraft. A thought pressed against his chest. This plane will take off without me, but the story will follow wherever it goes. Behind him, Naomi whispered to her live stream audience, he hasn't said a word yet. He doesn't have to. Look at him. They took his seat, but they couldn't take his dignity. Cale closed his eyes for a moment. In the darkness, he saw Maya again. Asking him last year if the world was changing, he had told her yes. He wondered if she would believe him after tonight. When he opened his eyes, Alyssa was still beside him. They'll approach you soon, she said. Probably someone higher up. They'll want to meet. Make it disappear before morning. Please don't sign anything without counsel. He nodded slowly. I'll think about it. Inside, his doubts roared. If he fought, his company could suffer. Investors could walk. Contracts could collapse. If he stayed silent, his soul would fracture. He could not decide which was worse. Celine's voice echoed in his memory. Strength isn't about avoiding storms. Cale, it's about deciding which ones you're willing to face. The choice loomed before him like the runway stretching out endlessly under the night sky. A flight announcement boomed over the loudspeakers, startling the crowd. Horizon Atlantic personnel hurried past, their faces tight, their whispers urgent. Somewhere in an office above the terminal, executives were drafting a statement, calculating risks, deciding how much his dignity was worth in dollars. Cale turned from the window, lifted his notebook, and wrote a single line across the page. Dignity is not optional. Then he closed it again. The night was far from over. The hotel room was dark except for the glow of the television. Cale Donovan sat at the edge of the bed, his notebook on the nightstand, his blazer draped across a chair. The clock read 2:20 a.m., but sleep had never come. He had tried lying down, closing his eyes, slowing his breath, yet the noise of the world beyond the window would not quiet. His phone pulsed every few seconds with new notifications. He finally picked it up. Twitter was aflood. The hashtag #BranchSeatWay burned across the top of the screen. The video Naomi had captured now had over 9 million views. Comments stacked one atop another, outrage pouring in like a tidal wave. This is blatant discrimination. No excuse. Look at how calm he was. And they still dragged him out. I've flown Horizon Atlantic for years. Never again. His composure is extraordinary. That's dignity. Kyle scrolled slowly, each message pressing against his chest. He saw his own face frozen in the still frames of the video, steady, composed, yet undeniably humiliated. The image had become a symbol overnight, and symbols carried weight heavier than flesh. The television flickered to the local news. A panel of anchors replayed the same clip Naomi had streamed. The curtain at the bottom read, "Passenger removed from first-class seat. Sparks outrage." One anchor leaned forward. It raises serious questions about bias in airline practices. We've received dozens of messages from viewers citing similar experiences. Cale muted the sound. His mind churned. Part of him wanted to throw the phone aside, to retreat into silence, to disappear until the storm passed. Another part, the part that had written those words in his notebook 1,000 times, told him this was no storm to run from. The knock on the door startled him. He hesitated, then opened it. Alyssa Monroe stood in the hallway, still sharp despite the late hour. She held a folder under her arm. Couldn't sleep either, she asked. Cale shook his head. The world won't let me. She stepped inside, laying the folder on the desk. The video is everywhere. National outlets, international outlets. I've already had 3 networks call me asking for statements. Cale rubbed his temples. And what did you tell them? That you need time? That you're considering legal options? She opened the folder, revealing printouts of tweets, articles, and early polling data. Public opinion is already against the airline. If you want to fight, you'll have the country at your back. He stared at the papers, the sea of headlines and commentary. And if I don't fight, Alyssa's eyes narrowed, then they bury this. They offer you money, maybe a public apology carefully worded, and by next week they call it a misunderstanding. But the pattern continues. People like Silas Trent keep doing what they've been doing, because they know the system protects them. Cale leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him. His thoughts drifted to his company. The contracts stacked on his desk back in New York. The investors who expected him to shield them from scandal. If he pressed forward, they might see him as reckless, jeopardizing millions. If he stayed silent, he would betray something far more valuable than contracts. The hotel phone rang, jarring him from his thoughts. He lifted the receiver. A crisp voice introduced herself as a communications officer from Horizon Atlantic headquarters. Mr. Donovan, we deeply regret the incident. We're prepared to arrange immediate compensation and rebooking at your convenience. Our CEO would like to personally extend his apologies. If you're willing, we can also discuss a non-disclosure arrangement to ensure your privacy. Cale's grip tightened on the phone. His throat burned with a sudden mix of anger and exhaustion. He glanced at Alyssa, who was watching intently. I'll consider your offer, he said coolly, then set the receiver back down. Alyssa raised an eyebrow. They're moving fast. They know this is dangerous. Cale's chest heaved with a sigh. Dangerous for who? For them or for me? She leaned forward. For both. But you have something they don't. Truth. That's leverage they can't erase. He stood, pacing to the window. Outside. The city shimmered in scattered lights. Somewhere out there. Naomi was still streaming updates. Isla Torres was wrestling with fear about her job, and millions of strangers were arguing in comment sections. The world had tilted in less than 12 hours. And he was standing on the fault line. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Celine. It was short, but it pierced deeper than any headline. Maya saw the video. She's proud of you. We both are. Don't give in. Cale closed his eyes, the words burning into him. He remembered Maya at age 6, climbing into his lap to ask why the world sometimes seemed unfair. He remembered promising her that he would fight for fairness wherever he could. The promise echoed now, demanding fulfillment. He turned back to Alyssa. If I speak publicly, it's not just my voice anymore. It's everyone's. Are you ready for that kind of fight? She smiled faintly, the smile of someone who had been waiting for a case like this her entire career. More than ready. The television volume rose slightly on its own, left unmuted by his fumbling. A new segment showed a shaky video from inside the terminal after his removal. It captured Alyssa handing him her card, Isla speaking in hushed tones, Naomi narrating the scene for her live stream audience. The clip was already viral, labeled Courage at Gate 42. Cale exhaled, realizing the narrative had escaped his control entirely. He was no longer just a man wronged. He was a symbol in a story others were telling for him. The only way to reclaim it was to step forward, to speak his truth directly. The digital clock clicked to 3 a.m. He sat again, opening his notebook. With deliberate strokes, he wrote across a fresh page. They will not define me. I will define this moment. Alyssa watched him write, her expression softening. Tomorrow morning, she said. CNN is asking you to appear live. It could be the beginning. Cale closed the notebook and looked up. His eyes were tired but steady. Then tomorrow morning, I speak. Outside, dawn was still hours away, but the wildfire was already burning. The conference room at Horizon Atlantic's headquarters buzzed with tension long before sunrise. The skyline outside was still cloaked in the last hours of night, but the glow of phones and laptops inside the room cast an unearthly light on the faces of executives. The long table was cluttered with coffee cups, printouts of trending hashtags, and stock market projections that dipped lower by the minute. At the head sat Victor Langston, the CEO, his silver hair immaculate, but his jaw tight with strain. He had been awakened at midnight by frantic calls from his communications team. By 3 a.m., the board demanded a full briefing. Now it was nearly 5, and the numbers scrolling across the projector screen looked worse with every update. Our stock dropped 6% in pre-market trading, the CFO muttered, flipping through a chart. If this continues after the opening bell, we're talking hundreds of millions lost by noon. Victor steepled his fingers, staring at the frozen image on the screen. It showed Cale Donovan, calm and upright, boarding pass in hand, his face steady even as Silas Trent towered over him. The caption below, pulled from social media, read, "Dignity is not optional." The phrase had already become a rallying cry online. How did this happen? Victor asked, his voice low, dangerous in its quiet. Who authorized removing him? The head of operations cleared his throat. Captain Pierce escalated after Silas Trent insisted the seat was being reassigned. Marcus Veyron backed them up. Victor's eyes narrowed. 3 employees made a decision that has our entire company bleeding out in real time. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose. Unacceptable. A young communications director spoke up nervously. We've drafted a statement. It frames the incident as a miscommunication about seating protocols. We emphasize our commitment to diversity and apologize for the inconvenience. Inconvenience, Victor snapped, his palm striking the table. The word hung in the air like smoke. The man is a black CEO who was publicly humiliated on our aircraft. Millions of people watched it happen. Half the country already believes we're a company built on discrimination. And you want to call it an inconvenience. The room went silent. The general counsel adjusted his glasses. We need to prepare for litigation. The removal itself might fall under unlawful discrimination, especially if other witnesses testify. If Mr. Donovan pursues this, he has a very strong case. Victor pinched the bridge of his nose. What are our options for settlement? The counsel spread his hands. We could offer a 7-figure payout, paired with a non-disclosure agreement. If he accepts, the matter is silenced, and the public outrage will cool in a week. The CFO interjected, It's cheaper than losing billions in market value. Victor's gaze hardened, and if he refuses, the counsel hesitated. Then we prepare for the fight of our lives. Meanwhile, across the city in his hotel room, Cale sat with his notebook open, scribbling fragments of thought that came in waves between exhaustion and clarity. Alyssa Monroe sat across from him, scrolling through updates on her laptop. Naomi's live stream had now been replayed on every major network. News outlets were calling it the most significant viral discrimination incident since the airline industry began digitizing passenger reports. Cale's phone vibrated again. This time, it was not a corporate voice, but his own board chair from Donovan Systems, the company he had built from the ground up. "Cale," the voice said, strained with worry, "you need to think carefully. Investors are panicking. If this drags on, contracts could be jeopardized. Take the settlement. Protect the company." Cale closed his eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "And if I do, what am I protecting it for? To build wealth in a world where dignity is negotiable?" The board chair was silent for a long beat. "Sometimes survival means compromise." Cale's jaw tightened. "And sometimes compromise is just another word for surrender." He ended the call, his chest pounding. He looked at Alyssa, who had heard enough to understand. "They want me to take the deal." "Of course they do," she said. "That's how this works. They protect themselves by convincing you that silence is strength. But you know better." He paced to the window, staring out at the gray dawn. His reflection in the glass looked older, more burdened. He thought of Celine, of the quiet strength in her voice when she texted him earlier. He thought of Maya, whose pride in him mattered more than any investor's approval. "What if I lose everything?" Cale whispered. Alyssa rose, her tone firm but gentle. "What if you gain something far greater? This isn't just about you. It's about everyone who has ever been told to move to the back, to give up their place, to accept less because someone else was deemed more deserving. If you fight for them too." Cale turned, his eyes burning with restrained fire. "And if I fight, they'll come after me with everything they have. Smear campaigns, doubts about my competence. They'll try to make me the villain." "Then let them try," Alyssa said. "The truth is stronger than their spin, and you've already shown the world who you are. Calm, dignified, unshaken. People are ready to follow that image. You don't realize it yet, but you've already become a symbol." The weight of her words pressed into him. A symbol. He had never asked for that role, but it had found him. He sat again, opening his notebook, and wrote across the page, "Dignity is not for sale." Back at Horizon Atlantic headquarters, Victor Langston leaned forward in his chair. "We will reach out to Mr. Donovan directly, offer him $2 million, plus lifetime platinum membership, plus a private apology. Make sure the press knows nothing about the NDA. If he signs, we bury this." The room nodded in tense agreement. But even as they plotted, Naomi's latest video played on a screen in the corner, where she told her growing audience, "He's not backing down. You can see it in his eyes. This isn't going to end with hush money." The wildfire of public opinion raged louder, beyond the reach of corporate containment, and in the quiet of his hotel room, Cale understood the storm was now his to command. By sunrise, the city was already awake with the story. News vans lined the curb outside the hotel where Cale Donovan was staying. Their antennas stretched toward the sky like grasping fingers. Reporters crowded the sidewalk, their voices rising above the traffic. Every screen in the lobby glowed with headlines that carried his name. Cale descended slowly in the elevator, his reflection caught in the mirrored walls. He had not slept, but his resolve was firm. Alyssa Monroe walked beside him, her phone buzzing constantly with new requests for comment. Naomi Cade had texted updates all night, each one more astonishing than the last. The video was now at 20 million views. Politicians were tweeting. Celebrities were reposting it with hashtags of solidarity. As the elevator doors slid open, the noise of the lobby engulfed him. Reporters surged forward, their questions colliding in a blur. Alyssa lifted her hand, her voice sharp. "No statements right now. Please respect his space. Security ushered Cale and Alyssa through a side exit into a waiting car. The driver shut the door quickly, muffling the chaos outside. Inside, silence returned, heavy but welcome. Cale exhaled, leaning his head back against the seat. It feels like I woke up in another world. Alyssa glanced at him. You did? That's what happens when truth collides with visibility. The car moved slowly through the city, passing billboards and bus stops already plastered with memes and slogans. One showed his face with the caption, "Hold your ground." Another showed the blurred still of Silas Trent towering over him with the words policy or prejudice. They pulled up to a community center where a press conference had been hastily arranged. Cale hesitated at the doorway, his chest tight. Inside, rows of chairs had been set for reporters. But what caught his eye were the people gathered near the front, those who had been on the flight with him. Naomi stood proudly, her phone still in hand, live streaming as always. Beside her was the older man from row 4, whom Cale now learned was Andre Baptiste, a small business owner from New Jersey. Next to him was a young mother who had flown with her child, Sarah Daniels. They greeted Cale with warmth that steadied him. Andre spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of his conviction. Mr. Donovan, I was there. I saw what they did. I want to go on record. They humiliated you for no reason other than who you are. Sarah nodded, holding her daughter's hand. My little girl asked me why they took you off the plane. I didn't have an answer, but I want her to grow up in a world where there is one. So I'll stand with you. Emotion surged in Cale's chest. He clasped Andre's hand, then Sarah's. Their courage reminded him that this fight was no longer just his. Reporters filed in, the hum of cameras filling the air. Alyssa stepped to the podium first, her tone clear. This is not just about one man's seat. This is about a pattern of systemic discrimination. Witnesses are here today to testify. The world deserves to know. She gestured, and Naomi stepped forward. Her livestream audience exploded with comments as she began to speak. I didn't plan to become part of this story. I just knew I couldn't stay silent. What happened was wrong, and I wanted people to see it. That's why I streamed it, and I'll keep streaming until change happens. Applause rose from the audience. Cale felt a tremor of pride in her courage. Then Andre spoke, steady and firm. I travel for my business. I've seen small acts of bias before, but this was different. This was targeted. It was calculated, and it has to stop. Sarah followed, her voice soft but resolute. I'm raising my daughter to believe that fairness is real, that people are treated with dignity. What I saw last night broke that belief. But maybe, just maybe, this can rebuild it. Cowsill stood finally, moving to the podium. The cameras clicked furiously, their lenses capturing every flicker of his expression. He took a long breath, feeling the weight of expectation pressing from every side. His hands rested lightly on the wood as he began. I did not ask to become the face of this story, he said, his voice low but steady, but I cannot ignore it either. Last night I was removed from a seat I paid for, not because of policy, but because of perception, because someone decided I did not belong in that seat. I walked off that plane with dignity, but many before me have been forced off in silence. That silence ends here. The room was still, the words sinking deep. He continued, This is not about one man or one airline. It is about a system that allows bias to hide behind procedures, that punishes people for simply existing in spaces they've earned. I built my company from nothing. I have worked my entire life for opportunities that should have been decided by merit. And still, last night, none of that mattered. What mattered to them was the color of my skin. His voice wavered slightly, not from weakness, but from the power of truth spoken aloud. I will not accept a quiet settlement. I will not sign away my dignity. Instead, I will stand with every person who has been pushed aside, ignored, or told to move. We deserve better. We demand better. And starting today, I will fight until better becomes reality. The room erupted with applause. Reporters shouted questions. But Cale stepped back, leaving his words to hang in the air. Outside, the world responded instantly. The speech was clipped and shared, millions more views cascading across the internet. Hashtags multiplied. Your dignity is not optional. Site 2-0, stand with Cale. Back at Horizon Atlantic headquarters, Victor Langston watched the footage with a sinking feeling. His executives shuffled nervously, whispering about damage control. The statement they had drafted now looked pitiful compared to the raw conviction in Cale's voice. "Damn it," Victor muttered, slamming a fist against the table. "He's not going away." But even as Victor seethed, elsewhere in the city, Cale was surrounded by allies. Alyssa outlined legal strategies. Naomi shared updates with her swelling online following. Andre and Sarah pledged to testify. And Hila Torres, still fearful but determined, sent a quiet message to Alyssa's office. "I'll speak. I'll tell the truth." Cale sat among them, exhaustion tugging at him but hope beginning to stir. For the first time since the humiliation on the plane, he felt the weight shift slightly. He was no longer walking alone. Others had joined him on the path, and together they were stronger than the storm. He opened his notebook, writing a single line. Beneath his earlier words, allies turned storms into movements, and as the cameras continued to roll, the movement was already taking shape. The next morning, the headlines had shifted from outrage to battle lines. Kel Donovan's speech had ignited a movement, but Horizon Atlantic was not surrendering quietly. Their PR machine moved with ruthless precision, and by mid-morning, counter-narratives began to surface. News tickers flashed with phrases carefully chosen by corporate lawyers. Sources suggest the passenger was uncooperative. Airline staff followed safety protocol. Incident caused significant delays, impacting hundreds. Each headline carried the fingerprints of spin, an attempt to reframe what millions had already seen with their own eyes. Cale sat in a modest office at the community center with Alyssa Monroe and Naomi Cade. The walls were plastered with posters from past civil rights campaigns, their slogans echoing the very struggle unfolding now. Naomi scrolled through her phone, her face tight. "They're painting you as disruptive," she said. "They're even pushing clips cut out of context, making it seem like you refused instructions." Alyssa leaned forward, her eyes flashing. This is classic corporate counterstrike. When they cannot erase the truth, they muddy it. They know they can't silence the video entirely, so they try to smear your character instead. Cale's jaw clenched. And people will believe it. Some will, Alyssa admitted, but not all. That's why we keep control of the narrative. Every time they twist, we answer with clarity. Before Cale could reply, the door opened and a man stepped in with the presence of someone used to commanding rooms. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and his smile carried a sharpness that made it feel more like a blade than a welcome. "Mr. Donovan," he said smoothly, extending a hand, "I'm Dorian Hale. I represent an investment group with interests in Horizon Atlantic." Cale did not take the hand. "And what does your group want with me?" Dorian lowered himself into a chair, uninvited. You're a brilliant man. Kyle. Self-made. Respected. But you're on the verge of burning down everything you've built. Investors are nervous. Contracts could vanish. Do you want to be remembered as the man who stood for dignity, or the man who sank his own empire chasing it? Cale studied him carefully. And I suppose you're here to offer me a way out. Dorian smiled thinly. Not a way out, a way forward. Horizon Atlantic is prepared to offer not just a settlement, but partnership. They'll compensate you generously, elevate your company with lucrative contracts, and ensure this incident disappears. You walk away wealthier and untarnished. Everyone wins. Naomi bristled. Everyone but the truth. Dorian's eyes flicked toward her dismissively. Truth is subjective. Young lady, what matters is stability. Markets like stability. And right now, you are destabilizing everything. Alyssa leaned forward, her voice sharp. What you're really saying is that Cale's silence is worth more to you than his dignity. You want him to trade justice for profit. Dorian's smile hardened. I'm saying he has a choice. He can be a martyr or a mogul. Martyrs inspire headlines. Moguls build legacies. The words cut deep. Cale felt the weight of them, heavy with temptation. His mind flashed images of boardrooms where his name commanded respect, of contracts worth billions, of the empire he had built brick by brick. He thought of Maya's future, the stability he could guarantee her if he simply chose comfort over conflict. But then another image came, the little girl on the plane, asking her mother why they were taking him away. The silence that followed. That silence could not be his legacy. Cale leaned forward, his eyes steady. You mistake me, Mr. Hale. My legacy is not for sale. Not to you. Not to Horizon Atlantic. Not to anyone. For the first time, Dorian's mask slipped, irritation flickering across his face. He rose, smoothing his jacket. Then prepare yourself, because if you won't bend, they'll break you. He left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. Silence hung for a long moment. Naomi broke it first. He's bluffing. Right. They can't really break you. Alyssa shook her head. They'll try. They'll dig into his past, twist his words, manufacture scandals. That's how power protects itself. Cale sank back into his chair, the exhaustion pressing down like gravity. His mind roared with doubts. What if Dorian was right? What if this fight consumed everything he had built? What if, in trying to protect dignity, he destroyed his company, his employees, his family's security? He closed his eyes, hearing Selang's voice again in memory. Strength is not about avoiding storms. It's about deciding which ones you're willing to face. He opened his notebook and wrote slowly, deliberately. If they try to break me, they will only reveal who they are. Later that afternoon, the smear campaign intensified. Anonymous sources began leaking claims that Cale had been rude to staff, that he had threatened legal action before being removed. Photos of him from old business trips were pulled out of context, framed as arrogance. Commentators on television debated his character more than the incident itself. Cale watched some of it on a muted screen, his stomach tight but his expression calm. Naomi sat beside him, furiously typing responses online, correcting lies with clips from her original live stream. Alyssa strategized calls with journalists, ensuring sympathetic voices balanced the smear. Then came an unexpected twist. Isla Torres, the junior flight attendant, stepped forward publicly. She released a statement through Alyssa's office, confirming that Silas Trent had a pattern of targeting passengers of color, that she had witnessed similar incidents but had been too afraid to speak until now. The statement exploded across media channels. Suddenly, the smear campaign faltered. Horizon Atlantic's carefully crafted narrative cracked under the weight of testimony from within its own crew. Cale read the statement silently, his heart swelling with gratitude for Isla's courage. He whispered to himself, "One voice breaks silence. Two voices build a chorus." By evening, allies poured in. Civil rights organizations released statements of support. Influential leaders called him privately, offering solidarity. Strangers sent messages by the thousands, sharing their own stories of being told to move, of being questioned for existing in spaces they belonged to. The pressure mounted on Horizon Atlantic. Their counterstrike had met resistance, not just from Cale, but from a swelling tide of truth. And though the battle was far from over, Cale felt something shift inside him. For the first time since the humiliation in Seat 2A, he believed victory was possible. The storm did not quiet. It gathered, sharpened, and turned directly toward Cale Donovan's life. By the third day, the headlines no longer focused solely on Horizon Atlantic's misconduct. They focused on Cale himself. Donovan under scrutiny read one ticker. CEO's past business practices questioned scrolled across another. Cale sat at the kitchen table in his hotel suite, a half-drunk cup of coffee cooling beside his notebook. Celine had flown in late the night before, her presence steady and grounding. Maya was with her grandmother, shielded from the frenzy, though not from whispers at school or the endless news cycle. Celine's hand rested lightly on Cale's shoulder now, a silent anchor as he scrolled through the latest smear. One headline suggested financial irregularities at Donovan's systems, twisting a routine audit into a scandal. Another claimed anonymous employees had described him as combative. A third pulled up an old photo of him exiting a nightclub, painting it as irresponsibility, Celine whispered. "They are trying to tear you down, piece by piece." Cale's voice was low. "And they might succeed." She turned his chair to face her, her eyes firm. "No, they won't. Because what they cannot touch is the truth of what happened on that plane, and the world saw it." Before Cale could answer, Alyssa Monroe arrived, her laptop under her arm. She dropped it on the table, flipping it open. "It's worse than we thought. They've hired a crisis PR firm. They're seeding stories everywhere. But that's not all." She pulled up a news site. The headline froze Cale's chest. Donovan family targeted in scandal beneath it. A grainy photo of Maya at a school science fair, taken without permission, paired with insinuations about Cale's parenting. The article was baseless, but it didn't matter. The attack had shifted from professional to personal. Cale's fist clenched. "They're dragging my daughter into this." Alyssa's jaw tightened. "This is the breaking point. Cale, they're betting you'll retreat to protect her, that you'll sign their NDA just to make it stop. But if you give in now, it only proves they were right to weaponize fear." Cale rose, pacing the room. His mind was a battlefield. He saw Maya's face, innocent, bright, caught in a world she did not choose. He heard Celine's voice urging strength, Alyssa's voice urging defiance. He felt the crushing weight of responsibility. Celine stood, crossing to him. "Cale, Maya's stronger than you think, and what you're fighting for is the very world she'll grow up in. Do you want her to see you bend to protect her now? Or do you want her to see you stand, so she never has to?" Cale stopped pacing. Her words pierced through the noise. He thought of the night Maya cried after being doubted in class. He thought of telling her that fairness was worth fighting for. The truth was clear if he backed down. He would not only betray himself, but also her. He returned to the table, sat heavily, and opened his notebook. Across a fresh page, he wrote, They will not silence me. They will not touch my family. I will fight. Alyssa exhaled with relief. Then we escalate. We file suit, not just against Horizon Atlantic, but against their executives directly. Discrimination, defamation, retaliation. We put them on trial in court and in the court of public opinion. Cale nodded slowly. Do it. That afternoon, the official filing went out. News outlets blasted the headline, "Donovan files discrimination and defamation. Suit against Horizon Atlantic." The document named Silas Trent, Marcus Veyron, Captain Roland Pierce, and CEO Victor Langston. It detailed not only Cale's removal from Seat 2A, but also the smear campaign that followed. The airline responded within hours, denying wrongdoing and vowing to fight. Their statement dripped with rehearsed indignation. Horizon Atlantic stands by its commitment to diversity and safety. We reject the baseless claims made by Mr. Donovan and look forward to proving our integrity in court. But outside corporate walls, the tide was turning. Hila Torres stepped forward again, this time on live television. She described Silas's history of targeting certain passengers, the threats he made to junior staff, the culture of silence within the airline. Her voice shook, but her words were powerful. I was afraid to speak, she admitted, but I cannot stay silent anymore. What happened to Mr. Donovan was not an accident. It was part of a pattern. The clip went viral within minutes. Hashtags surged again, this time with her name. Istant with Isla trended alongside Rashka Seat 2A. Cale watched the broadcast from his suite, Celine's hand gripping his tightly. His eyes glistened, not from weakness, but from gratitude. One ally had become many, and the chorus was growing louder. That night, Cale finally allowed himself a moment of release. He stepped onto the balcony, the city lights sprawling below. He thought of the path behind him, the humiliation of being escorted off the plane, the sleepless nights of doubt, the relentless attacks on his name. He thought of the path ahead: courtrooms, boardrooms, cameras, headlines, inside. Celine joined him, slipping her arm through his. You're not alone in this. We'll weather it together. Cale looked out at the horizon, his chest rising with a steadier breath. They wanted to break me? Instead, they've shown me what I'm fighting for. He closed his notebook for the night. The words written on its pages no longer just reminders, but declarations. Dignity was not optional. Dignity was the line he would not cross. And the world was beginning to see it too. By the time the lawsuit hit the docket, the country was already split into camps. One side saw Cale Donovan as a symbol of dignity, a man refusing to bow in the face of systemic discrimination. The other, fueled by Horizon Atlantic's PR spin and political commentators, painted him as disruptive, opportunistic, or ungrateful. The truth battled lies across every screen, every feed, every living room conversation. Cale sat in a quiet studio just off a bustling newsroom. The producers had insisted he go live, that he speak directly to the public. Alyssa Monroe had counseled him carefully beforehand. This isn't a deposition, Kyle. It's not about legal detail. It's about connecting. Be human. Let them see the man who sat in 2A and refused to lose his dignity. The red light above the camera blinked on. A host asked the first question. Mr. Donovan, why not take the settlement? Why escalate this into a lawsuit that could drag on for years? Cale looked into the lens, his voice steady, carrying weight without force. Because what happened wasn't just about me. If I sign a paper, accept money, and stay quiet, then the next person removed from their seat won't have a voice. The little girl who asked her mother why I was taken off the plane won't get an answer. And my daughter, Maya, will grow up learning that silence is safer than truth. I won't teach her that. The host leaned forward. Are you saying this is bigger than one incident? Cale nodded slowly. This is about a system that has allowed bias to masquerade as policy. I didn't fight my way into that seat to prove I belonged. I belonged because I paid for it, because I earned it, because humanity itself doesn't need proof. And yet I was still told to move. That is not just about me. That is about us all. The segment ended, but the clip replayed endlessly online. Within hours, it had tens of millions of views. Cale's words were cut into sound bites, shared with hashtags. Civil rights leaders praised his composure. Teachers played the video in classrooms. Activists put it on signs during protests outside Horizon Atlantic terminals, at headquarters. Victor Langston watched grimly as the public tide turned further against the airline. Every time he opens his mouth, we lose another 100 million in market value, he muttered. Executives scrambled with new talking points, but the company's statements rang hollow against the clarity of Cale's message. Back in the city, Cale returned to the community center that had become his makeshift headquarters. The place buzzed with volunteers, lawyers, and supporters. Naomi Cade streamed updates to her audience, now numbering in the millions. Isla Torres was there, too, meeting quietly with Alyssa to prepare her official testimony. Andre Baptiste and Sarah Daniels helped organize press requests. The small group had grown into a movement. Cale walked through the hall, stopping to thank each person. He listened to their stories of passengers bumped from flights, of employees silenced by fear, of families embarrassed in public. He wrote down their names in his notebook, one by one, a ritual of remembrance. That evening, he stood before the group. His voice carried not as a CEO, but as a man speaking from conviction. This fight is not mine alone anymore. It belongs to every person who has been told they are less, to every worker silenced for speaking truth, to every passenger who paid their fare but not their dignity. We will not stop until this system changes. The room erupted in applause. Naomi caught it all on stream, her viewers flooding the comments with hearts and words of solidarity. Meanwhile, Horizon Atlantic tried a new tactic. They purchased full-page ads in major newspapers, emphasizing their commitment to equity and pledging a review of policies. But the ads backfired. Editorials mocked them as shallow. Memes spread online showing the airline's logo stamped with the phrase "commitment to equity," except in Seat 2A. The public opinion war had become lopsided. Horizon Atlantic was a faceless corporation. Cale was a man with a family, with eyes that looked into cameras and spoke truth. The choice between the two resonated deeply with millions. Still, Cale felt the strain. At night, when the cameras were gone, he lay awake replaying every decision. What if the courts ruled against him? What if investors pulled out of Donovan Systems entirely? What if his employees lost their livelihoods because he refused to settle? The doubts gnawed at him. Selene was always there in those moments, her voice soft but unyielding. Kyle, remember why you started. Not for money, not for recognition, but to prove that integrity matters. Hold to that. Maya called one evening, her voice bright through the phone. Daddy, we watched your interview in class today. My teacher said you were brave. I told her you're always brave. Cale's throat tightened. Thank you. Maya, that means more than you know. He ended the call with fresh resolve. This was no longer about contracts or market value. It was about the lesson he would leave for his daughter and for every child watching. Within a week, rallies formed outside Horizon Atlantic's largest hubs. Protesters carried signs reading, "Dignity is not optional, and we belong in every seat." Airlines across the industry watched nervously, sensing the winds of reform. Lawmakers began drafting inquiries. The Department of Transportation released a statement promising a review of bias complaints. Cale stood on the steps of the courthouse with Alyssa, Naomi, Isla, Andre, and Sarah beside him. The crowd roared as he raised his notebook, the words written inside now etched into banners and chants. He spoke into the microphones. His voice carried across the plaza. "We are not here for vengeance. We are here for justice. We are here so that the next passenger, the next employee, the next child, asking why will never hear silence again." The cheers rolled like thunder. Cameras captured the moment, framing it not just as a lawsuit, but as the birth of something larger. Inside, Cale felt the enormity of it all pressing down. The court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict. The real courtroom awaited. But whatever happened next, he knew one truth. Silence had been broken, and it could never be restored. The courthouse loomed against the morning sky, its marble columns gleaming as if carved to remind everyone who passed that justice was meant to stand unshaken. Yet Cale Donovan felt the tremor of nerves as he stepped out of the black sedan and faced the crowd. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Protesters waved signs with his words, "Dignity is not optional," written in bold letters. Alyssa Monroe walked beside him, her expression fierce and unyielding. Naomi Cade streamed the moment live to her massive following. Behind them came Hila Torres, Andre Baptiste, and Sarah Daniels, all prepared to testify. Celine and Maya watched from a safer distance, knowing the courtroom itself was Cale's battlefield. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Horizon Atlantic's lawyers filled one side of the room, a small army armed with binders, tablets, and cold calculation. At their center sat Victor Langston, the CEO, his jaw clenched, his gaze sharp. Across from him, Silas Trent and Marcus Veyron whispered to one another, their arrogance brittle under the scrutiny of the press. Captain Roland Pierce sat stiffly, his uniform crisp but his eyes avoiding Cale's. The judge entered, her gavel striking once. The room settled into silence. Opening statements began. Alyssa rose first, her voice cutting clean through the air. This case is not about one man's inconvenience. It is about systemic humiliation, about bias disguised as protocol, about an airline that thought silence could be bought. Mr. Donovan was removed from his rightful seat not because of safety, but because of perception. And when he refused to disappear quietly, Horizon Atlantic attempted to smear his name and intimidate his family. "We will show you the truth. We will show you the pattern, and we will prove that dignity cannot be negotiated." Murmurs swept the gallery. Cale sat still, his notebook resting on the table before him, a reminder of every word he had written since that night. The airline's lead counsel followed, his voice polished, almost rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is built on exaggeration. Our staff acted in accordance with protocol. The passenger became argumentative, and the captain made a decision for the safety and comfort of all. Horizon Atlantic respects diversity and has no tolerance for discrimination. This is a misunderstanding inflated by social media, not a matter for the courts." The words hung, empty against the weight of the truth. Testimony began. Naomi was called first. She described the night in vivid detail, her voice steady as the live stream clips were played on the large screen. The courtroom watched as Kyle was asked to move, as Silas stood over him, as the captain threatened removal, Every frame contradicted the airline's claims. Next came Andre Baptiste, his hands clasped firmly as he spoke. I was there. Mr. Donovan was calm. He showed his ticket. He asked only for fairness. It was not protocol that removed him. It was prejudice. Sarah Daniels testified after, her young daughter sitting quietly in the gallery. I had to explain to my child why a man who did nothing wrong was forced out of his seat. I had no answer. That is why I am here. So she will know silence is not the answer. The defense tried to shake them, suggesting bias, exaggeration, personal agendas, but the witnesses held firm. The video evidence reinforced every word. Then came Isla Torres. She walked to the stand with trembling hands, but stood tall. I worked that flight, she began, her voice catching. Silas Trent has done this before. He targets passengers of color, women traveling alone, anyone he thinks will not fight back. We all knew it, but we were afraid to speak. That night, I stayed silent. I regret it, but I am here now. What happened to Mr. Donovan was not an isolated mistake. It was part of a culture we were told to protect. The courtroom stirred. Victor Langston shifted in his seat, his face hard. Alyssa's voice rose with quiet triumph. Thank you, Ms. Torres. The truth is always worth the risk. Finally, it was Cale's turn. He rose slowly. The room hushed as he approached the stand. Every eye followed him. Every camera clicked. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and sat. The questions began. Alyssa asked him to recount the night. His voice never wavered. I sat in seat 2A with a valid ticket. I was told to move without cause. I refused because I had paid for that seat, because it was mine, because my dignity is not for sale. I was calm. I was clear. And still, I was removed. He paused, looking toward the jury. But this is not just about me. It is about every person who has been told they do not belong. It is about every silence that followed. I am here because silence must end. The airline's counsel cross-examined, probing for weakness. Mr. Donovan, do you deny that your presence on social media escalated this situation? Cale met his gaze. Social media did not escalate this. Injustice did. All I did was exist in the wrong skin for the wrong crew member. That is not escalation. That is reality. The words cut deep, echoing in the still air. Even some jurors shifted uncomfortably. After hours of testimony, the judge recessed. Cale returned to his seat, Celine catching his eye from across the gallery. Maya waved shyly, her small hand a beacon of courage. Cale smiled faintly, renewed. Outside, the courthouse steps filled with supporters chanting his name, holding signs, demanding change. Inside, horizon. Atlantic's defense cracked further with each passing hour. When court adjourned for the day, Alyssa whispered to Cale, "We are winning, not just here. Out there, too. They can't stop this momentum." Cale looked at the courthouse ceiling, the murals of justice painted centuries ago. For the first time, he felt those ideals inch closer to reality. The trial was not over, but the truth had found its voice. The final day of the trial dawned with heavy skies. Crowds swarmed outside the courthouse, their chants echoing against the stone walls. Signs rose above the sea of people. Justice for Cale. Seat 2A belongs to all of us. Dignity is not optional. Inside, the air was charged with anticipation. The jury had deliberated overnight. Now they were ready to deliver their verdict. Cale Donovan sat at the plaintiff's table, his notebook resting beneath his folded hands. Celine was in the gallery, Maya beside her, eyes wide but unafraid. Alyssa Monroe leaned forward, her expression calm but electric, the quiet confidence of someone who believed justice was within reach. On the other side, Horizon Atlantic's legal team shifted uneasily. Victor Langston sat rigid, his face carved from stone, though his eyes betrayed the fear of a man whose empire was on the line. Silas Trent stared at the floor. Marcus Veyron chewed the inside of his cheek. Captain Roland Pierce's hands fidgeted on the table, betraying cracks in his composure. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered, her robe sweeping as she took her seat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood, a sheet of paper trembling slightly in her grasp. "We have, Your Honor." Cale's heart pounded, but his expression remained steady. He thought of every sleepless night, every smear headline, every moment of doubt. He thought of Maya's voice telling him he was brave. He thought of the passengers who had stood beside him, of Isla Torres risking her career, of Naomi broadcasting the truth when no one else would. The foreperson read aloud, "On the charge of unlawful discrimination, we find the defendants liable." A ripple of gas swept the courtroom. "On the charge of defamation and retaliation, we find the defendants liable." Another wave of sound. "We award damages to the plaintiff in the amount of $75 million. The room erupted. Supporters in the gallery cheered. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked in bursts. Cale closed his eyes, a rush of relief flooding his chest. Celine gripped Maya tightly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Maya clapped, her small hands echoing against the wooden benches. The judge banged her gavel. "Order! Order!" The noise quieted, though the energy could not be contained. Victor Langston slumped, his empire fractured in public view. Silas Trent's face paled. Marcus Veyron cursed under his breath. Captain Pierce simply lowered his head, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Alyssa touched Cale's arm. "We did it." Cale nodded slowly. "No, we all did." Outside, the courthouse steps became a stage. Cale emerged in blinding flashes and thunderous cheers. The crowd roared his name. Microphones pressed forward. Naomi streamed live, her voice breaking with emotion as she narrated the moment to millions. Isla stood nearby, her courage shining in the daylight. Andre Baptiste raised his fist in solidarity. Sarah Daniels lifted her daughter onto her shoulders so she could see the man who had fought for dignity and won. Cale stepped to the podium set up hastily by supporters. He looked out at the thousands before him, at the millions watching online, and spoke with the same calm strength that had carried him from humiliation to victory. "This verdict is not just mine. It belongs to every person who has been told they do not belong. It belongs to every employee who feared speaking truth. It belongs to every child who asked why and never got an answer. Today, the answer is clear. We belong. We matter. Dignity is not optional." The crowd erupted, their cheers shaking the air. He continued, "Horizon Atlantic has been held accountable. But this is bigger than one airline. This is about a system that must change. That is why I will not simply accept this verdict and move on. Today, I am announcing the creation of the Donovan Foundation for Transportation Equity. Its mission will be simple: to ensure no passenger is ever stripped of dignity, no worker is ever silenced, no child is ever left wondering why fairness failed them." The chants rose again, louder than before. Maya smiled wide, pride radiating from her small frame. Celine wiped her tears, her heart full. Over the following weeks, the consequences rippled across the industry. Victor Langston resigned under pressure, his career in ruins. Silas Trent and Marcus Veyron were fired and barred from airline employment. Captain Pierce lost his command. Horizon Atlantic implemented sweeping reforms under new leadership, including mandatory anti-bias training, independent oversight, and real-time reporting systems. Other airlines, fearing similar lawsuits, adopted similar measures voluntarily. The Donovan Foundation received millions in donations within days. Partnerships formed with universities, advocacy groups, and government agencies. Isla Torres joined as director of training, using her experience to transform flight crew culture. Naomi Cade became head of media strategy, channeling her livestream audience into activism. Andre and Sarah became board members, their voices grounding the mission in lived experience. Cale returned to his company, Donovan Systems, stronger than before. Investors who once doubted him now celebrated his resilience. Contracts grew, not shrank. His reputation, once threatened by smear, now glowed with integrity. Yet despite the victories, Cale remained humble. In quiet moments, he sat with his notebook, writing reminders of what the journey had cost and what it had given. He wrote of humiliation turned into power, of fear turned into courage, of silence turned into song. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the city, Cale sat with Selene and Maya on their balcony. The world outside buzzed with headlines, but here was peace. Maya leaned against him, her voice soft. "Daddy, you kept your promise. You showed them fairness is real." Cale kissed the top of her head. "I didn't do it alone, and the fight isn't finished. But yes, Maya, fairness is real, and we proved it." Selene squeezed his hand, her eyes warm. "You turned pain into purpose. That's the legacy she'll remember." Cale looked out at the horizon, a faint smile touching his lips. The words in his notebook echoed in his heart. Dignity is not for sale. Dignity is the foundation on which true justice stands. And as the city lights flickered on, Cale knew the story was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told to move, to step aside, to accept less. It belonged to a world ready to rise. As the verdict echoed through the courtroom and the crowd roared outside, Cale Donovan's story became more than a legal victory. It became a reminder that dignity is not optional, that silence is never the answer, and that every voice, whether passenger, employee, or child, asking why deserves to be heard. This story is about courage in the face of humiliation, love that anchors in the storm, and justice that demands accountability. It is also a mirror, reflecting the ugly truth of prejudice and the power of standing against it. We leave this chapter with hope. Hope that airlines, corporations, and all of us can choose fairness over fear, humanity over habit. And we leave with a challenge, too, to carry Cale's lesson into our own lives, to never step aside when dignity is at stake. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's keep these conversations alive. Let's honor those who stand tall, and let's walk together toward the next story that demands to be told.